Hello, Thomas.
What is going on, Sean? How's everything going, buddy?
Everything's going great. How about you, my friend?
Good, good. It's great to see you. I know our tough cookie Gwen is still recovering from her shoulder surgery, and we're giving her all the best. But I always like seeing your smiling face, Sean. So it's always.
I'm glad somebody likes to see me once in a while.
Just remember, it's me.
I will.
Yeah. Just want to let everybody know, again, appreciate everybody watching the show and tuning in. Tonight's show, it's been, last week was a repeat. Unfortunately, I had a death in the family, and I was away in Connecticut. So they ran, the first episode we ever did. But, these last 2 weeks, this episode we're doing tonight's really been on my mind. Just people watching, it really can trigger some emotions from your childhood. We're talking about the traumas that could happen. Again, not everybody becomes a serial killer and all that. There are things that happened that in your childhood that can manifest into that. Sometimes it's like a perfect storm, but we'll talk about that. Again, everybody, if you have questions, make sure you put them in all caps so Sean will have them at the end of the show. We can answer some questions that could be helpful for you when you raise your children, whether you're a teacher, caregiver, anything like that, the signs to look out for. We're going to go over all that. Other than that, what do you got going on, Sean? What's going on in your life right now?
Well, we've got some investigations. I'm going to be teaming up with a few teams, Haunted Happy Hour, Inspector Paranormal here in about a month or so. We're going to be going to the Rock Island Roadhouse, and we got a few other investigations coming up that will actually go live.
Perfect. So those are always fun. I love doing some of the live stuff just so people could see, like, maybe an historical place they can't get out to, what it's all about. Because we got to remember, when we're talking to the spirits, we're talking to history. So we're talking to them, whatever went on in their life, whatever traumas have kept them there, or those types of things. So it's always fun. Again, anybody, if you say hi, anything like that, just remember, at the end of the show, of course, I'm going to catch up with you and all that. So, because it gets into a serious topic and it's hard for me to concentrate on all that. And I just want to make sure I give you guys the info, that could help somebody put them on a different trajectory. It's going to be a big one. But, what I got going on coming up, again, probably the most recent thing coming up, we have a psychic fair here in Ohio, in Mentor, Ohio. That's going to be a big one because we're going to have, of course, my better half, Stacia Wills, will be there. And also the man, the myth, the legend himself, Kenneth Drake, will be there. So it's got the Billy's Acapella Martini Bar in Mentor, Ohio. We've been advertising that. So we got all kinds of things coming up. Not this weekend, but this weekend coming up. Of course, it's the grandchild's birthday, so we'll be out there for that. The following weekend, we'll be on the red carpet with the Groffs and their new documentary that's coming out. The Connecticut Paracon, of course, July 11th. That's a big one. We have tons of Paracons that we're going to be at this year, all over the place: New Orleans, Cleveland, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, you name it. We're going to be there to pass along the knowledge of the war journey experience and just war journey in general, and what we could do for people, especially with trauma like we're going to talk about tonight. But speaking of trauma and children and what we're going to talk about tonight, Sean, I think from here, let's zoom in and uncover the criminal mind. Here we go. So again, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is going to be a big one. It might be tough to get through because a lot of this stuff, some of the things, I don't think anybody ever gets through their whole life without some kind of trauma or anything they've gone through. Again, this could trigger. That's why we got the warning below. But, it's a heavy topic. It's an incredibly important one. Serial killers, it's an extreme end of the spectrum. The core of our conversation tonight is just going to be more about the nurturing, the empathy, our impulse controls to help our children with, and more of learning the healthy attachments and what to look out for. So I know true crime is a big thing. You know, the common question is for most when we're dealing with children is, are they born or are they made? So we want to move past some sensationalism to discuss a little bit more of the practical or psychological foundations, raising pro-social, emotionally healthy children. And hopefully this episode will help with that. So it's very important. So the best topic to get into right off the bat, first part of the show here for you guys, it's the nature versus nurture. There's a big debate about that, especially nowadays regarding serial killers. So as we shift away from the strict binary toward an integrated model is what we want to do. Most of us modern criminologists, neuroscientists describe to the bisocial theory, basically meaning which suggests that the specific cocktail of biological vulnerability and environmental triggers must be present for a serial predator to emerge. So that's like the big top that we got there. So the nature argument, so we're going to do the biological to genetic. This is some of the things that we have to look at. So the side of this debate focuses on the physical brain and the genetic predisposition that exists before an individual is even born. So while we're in utero, so the warrior gene, MAOA. So the research has identified monoamine oxidase is a gene which regulates the neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Certain variants of the gene are associated with an increased risk of violent behavior. So that's one of those biological things, the genetics. So brain structure is another big thing. Neuroimaging or captured serial killers have often revealed low activity in the orbital cortex, which handles ethics, morality, impulse controls, and the amygdala, the seat of the emotion and empathy. So those are things that could be off, whether it be they're born that way, accidental things that could happen. So an the autonomic nervous system, many high capacity offenders exhibit a low resting heart rate and low skin conductance, suggesting they are under aroused. This can lead to sensation seeking to feel any level of stimulation. We all seen that in movies, and some people say, you know, I just don't feel anything. I want to feel something. You know, no matter what happens, they don't get that sensation of joy or anything, the loss of emotion, like a psychopath or anything, but really looking for that at a young age. So, but the nurture argument, you know, our environmental and development. So this perspective argues that the killers are made and not born. We're focusing on childhood trauma and socialization. So historically, a lot of people have heard of this. I've mentioned this before. We'll try and breeze this one. The McDonald triad. Well, not every offender displays all three of these. The presence of this trio is late childhood adolescence is a significant clinical marker for that, especially with a lot of the testing they've done, especially at the BSU, interviewing a lot of the serial killers in prison with these questions and bringing these up. A lot of them displayed these types of things, which of course, one of them, animal cruelty. This is often the most significant indicator because it's not just animal cruelty, but with the kids, cruelty towards other fellow students, things like that, or other kids in the neighborhood. It isn't just curiosity, but a deliberate, repetitive, and ritualistic infliction of pain or killing of animals, showing a lack of empathy for living things. So we have the other part, fire setting or pyromania. It's intentional fire setting used as a release for tension or as a way to exert power over the environment. So a lot of people, they have that buildup tension and they just want to release it. It's not only the fire setting. Another thing to look at is some of our kids, when they can't handle emotion, they cut themselves too. And that's another type of way they release tension or whatever they're going through. So that's another thing to, of course, look out for, especially in the teen years when they really don't understand, you know, their changes and stuff. But the other part is bedwetting. This specifically when it continues past the age of 5 or 6, it's often linked to high levels of anxiety, humiliation, or trauma. So we really have to be careful of how we treat our kids. Some kids, unfortunately, their parents are still going through trauma. They humiliate their kids when they wet the bed, and that causes more anxiety. So we have to be cognizant of that and how to get through that and be a little bit more rewarding and to, get them through that. There's the attachment theory. The attachment theory is big. It's severe neglect or inconsistent caregiving during infancy. It can prevent a child from forming healthy emotional bonds. This is the lack of attachment can evolve in the profound lack of empathy seen in psychopathy. So that's really that attachment, they've done studies of this where actually with monkeys and all that, where they take the mother away or ones with the mother, the monkeys and all that. It just shows how they develop and just with that attachment theory. There's a trauma control model that we talk about, there's proposed, it was Dr. Eric Hickey. This suggests that the chronic childhood trauma, sexual, physical, or psychological, creates a trauma reinforcement cycle where the individual retreats into a violent fantasy world to regain a sense of power. Really want to talk about this part, going into a fantasy world to regain a sense of power. When kids are young, really what's on their mind is it hasn't become difficult yet. A lot of that critical thinking hasn't kicked in, but there's that survival. It's a triangle where, hey, my main thing is I want to feel safe. I want to have friends. I want to socialize and all that. And I need shelter. So those types of things are in there, and kids will do whatever they have to, whether the traumas are going on, they're experiencing something and they have to figure out, well, how do I get safe? So a lot of these kids, when there's so much trauma, the safety is to go to, a fantasy world or a violent fantasy world, whatever helps them regain that sense of who I am and what keeps me safe. So that's a big part of that. So there's a synthesis. There's a three-legged stool that we talk about, and it's by Dr. James Fallon, not Jimmy Fallon from the show at night. So definitely not. He's a neuroscientist. He discovered himself that he had brain scans of a psychopath, but he lived a pro-social life. So he, of course, didn't become, that psychopathic trait, but his brain scans show that. So as we're talking about nature, nurture, in that aspect, which could have been totally different for him. But it argues that there's three specific factors that must align for somebody to get to that becoming a serial killer, psychopath, or anything with this three-legged stool. So there's genetics, which is one part of that three-legged stool. It's a possession of high-risk violence-related genes like our MAOA, the warrior gene, of course, too much of that. The brain pattern, again, it's reduced function in the prefrontal cortex and amygdala. So trying to make those decisions, trying to get through that critical thinking. So there's early abuse, that's part of it. It's a significant trauma or abandonment occurring in early childhood. A lot of times people don't realize is we can't really put two and two together. When critical thinking kicks in, some of that stuff is forgotten. It's pushed to the back. We don't know, but it tends to become more as we get older. So the consensus is, this is the big one now. So nature provides, so our nature versus nurture again, nature provides the loaded gun, our predisposition, but nurture pulls the trigger. That's the catalyst. So without the environmental trauma, the biological predisposition might manifest as high stakes risk taking. So they may not become a killer or commit homicide. Some of them become CEOs or big time lawyers, and they want that adrenaline rush or become a test pilot or something like that. So that high risk type of thing later on in life. So that's a big part of it. So, things we want to recognize in our kids. I know you talked the nature versus nurture, but the things that we have to look at as parents, watching what our children go through, and us as parents too, with our traumas that we'll go into also, and what we manifest onto our children. We have to be very careful of that. It's so hard with that the ancestral trauma that you were treated one way and you feel that's the right thing, and then you treat your kids, and that keeps going on and on. We have to break those chains. And with the breaking of the chains is to give our kids a better chance to maybe avoid some of these situations, ending up in prison, or, you know, a lot of things that we talk about with those types of traumas, especially when we're talking about serial killers. We're trying to avoid that perfect storm. Can we avoid everything? You know, if they gave a book on how to be the perfect parent, then I think everybody would have it, because everybody wants their kids to do well, and we want to do the best by our kids. But again, with our traumas, we put them on our own children. And unfortunately, that's what happens sometimes, some worse than others. And there'll be an episode where we get into that also. But, you know, the foundation of our attachment, so when we talk about, you know, how we're growing up and how we form things, that's the one we really got to look at. You know, that's the power of core memories, how we go back and remember stuff. Some people that have been through, you know, violent problems that have happened, they remember everything. Some people just block it totally out. So where your core memories come in, it's, you know, how secure attachment in infancy, it prevents the emotional numbing. So that's often seen by violent offenders. So they just numb these things out, don't even know, but, you know, later on in life, they become a violent offenders. How their core memories and the power of them and what they do to us, and how they sit there and manifest later on in life in one way or another. Now, there's mirror neurons, you know, especially raising our kids. It's explaining the biological basis of empathy. We have to explain it. Sometimes empathy and how we display, you know, if your parents are very loving, we see that, and they care for each other. We're visually seeing this. It's a mirroring neuron, as we learn. So if a child doesn't see empathy modeled, their brain doesn't learn to fire those same circuits. So, you know, it's basically setting a good example for our children and explaining it and seeing how they're feeling and all that. We have to bring that out and have those conversations. So again, we talked about the safe harbor. It's the importance of a child knowing they can express dark emotions, anger, jealousy, frustration, without losing their parents' love. It's okay for our kids to get angry and show emotion and not scold them. We just want to try and get to the point where, you know, we let them know we love them and all that, and trying to work through why they're angry, why they might be jealous of somebody, why they might be frustrated. Especially frustration's big, especially at the young age, because kids are starting to learn their words and how to say things. And that's a big point of the next part, is the red flags versus development stages. So our normal aggression. So these are things we have to look at and pinpoint. Is it something normal or is it something abnormal? You know, toddlers bite and hit. You know, kids, they bite their cousin or something like that. They don't know how to express themselves yet. So there's the lack of vocabulary. But that's another point that we have to really look at, is our callous, unemotional traits. So the warning signs, you always have that consistent lack of remorse after hurting others. So if somebody hurts somebody and they don't feel bad about it, that's a concern sometimes. We have to really look at that, and we really have to talk to our kids and see, you know, where their mind is at, and if it's something that's learned, or if it's something like we talked about with a lack of development in those impulse controls or things like that in our brain. But there's also that premeditated, calculated aggression rather than impulsive outburst. So sometimes we're like anybody else. Somebody said something, you get mad, you yell at them, or, you know, some people just, you know, at a younger age, they might just hit somebody back. It's an impulse outburst of emotion. Now, they have aggression, but they're like planning it out. You shouldn't be planning or premeditating aggression at that young of an age. So those are the things we really have to look at. Now, there's extreme animal cruelty, not just curiosity, but a lack of emotional response to the distress of the animal. That one disturbs me the most. I, like anybody else out there, I love animals. This was the one that never got me. This is the one that always makes my blood curdle. This is the thing you have to get down really quick with your kids and all that. You have to see what's going on. because that's a big one. It's part of that McDonald triad. And, we look at people like Dahmer, his cruelty to animals because he wanted to see their insides. I know there'll be a whole episode that we'll talk about and break down Dahmer, but that's one part of it. So there's also the role of neurodiversity. That's a big one. It's distinguishing between sensory meltdowns or the ADHD impulsivity and intentional harm, like we talked about, calculated, anything like that. Some people have sensory meltdowns, and again, neurodiversity, we're looking at people on the spectrum and all that. Is that something that's normal for them? It's not meaning that it's something that's going to lead them into being serial killers, but we really have to have that psychological and be able to pinpoint in on what our kids are developing into, and what goes with that, what's normal, what's abnormal, is the things we have to look at and get them help for that, and help them through their life under that neurodiversity. So, but there's the environmental, we call the fertilizer, it's fertilizing and things like that. So let's go back to what we talked about before. So sometimes, the genetics might load the gun, but environment will pull the trigger. So we have the modern desensitization, and that's what they talk about a lot. They'll blame it on video games, violent video games, things, and we really need our kids, especially nowadays. I know growing up Generation X, we might have had an Atari or something like that, those things, and we got addicted to those, but it's just everything is electronic now. There's a disconnect, especially after COVID. It's people have internalized and all that. So that's with this modern type of, the impact that it has. It's 24/7. Our digital lives, we're constantly doing this. People have lost that empathy for each other. They're so involved in things. And I know a lot of times there's parents that don't want to be bothered, and just give their kids these electronic devices and go ahead, do whatever you want. I've had friends tell me, and, especially back in the day when war was going on, some kids would sit their children in front of the TV and they're seeing all this violence at such a young age, and, how their brain develops seeing that and not being able to put two and two together. Remember, sometimes at the young age, critical thinking hasn't kicked in yet. So when it does, they can't make sense of that. So that's a hard thing. So we have to be careful what our kids are watching, how they're learning, what they're doing with the digital stuff. It's crazy nowadays, and how this generation, what it's going to look like when it gets older. It's starting to show different things. It's unfortunate, but we really do have to keep an eye at a certain age to let our kids get into this type of stuff and not just use it as the digital babysitter. We have to be cognizant of that, especially as parents or any caregiver of that sort. So there's also that toxic shame. We have a childhood humiliation often involves into adult righteous rage. There's always that humility, like I talked about, parents yelling at their kids, and not explaining things. We can't just yell at our kids. There's going to be angry moments. That's with anything, but there is the part where you have to explain why you're upset, just like you want them to explain why they're upset. There's that communication. So if you're just sitting there, the kid's he's going to be considers they just humiliated me and I don't know why. So you're leaving them with that, and that's they feel they have righteous rage as they get older, and that's things we have to be careful of because they can't handle that humiliation. There's no communication on how to get through it. There's behavioral and emotional indicators. This is a big one. Modern profiling. We focus heavily on how a child interacts with others and reacts to consequences. So that's a big thing. So callousness and lack of empathy. That's the inability to understand or care about the feeling of others. Yes, that's bad. This often manifests as a coldness when others are in pain. That's your psychopath. The beginnings of it are lack of guilt or remorse. When a child does not feel bad after hurting someone or breaking a major rule, they may only seem sorry. That mask of sanity, they want to make, oh yeah, I'm sorry, but they really aren't. If it helps them avoid punishment, because then again, the punishment comes on them. It's their self-preservation without the lack of caring for others. So they only care about themselves. So there's the pathological lying. lying not just to get out of trouble, but lying for sport, see what they get away with, or to manipulate others, or even when the truth would suffice. There's so many people out there, especially into adulthood. I've noticed that, you know, their lives are great, but they feel they need to lie to make it better. I don't know why. I really don't think, you know, we're so busy worrying about ourselves and if anybody likes us, those types of things, you know, or how we are socially. I don't think people are worried about you being more than what you are. Just be who you are and all that. And that's a hard thing we have to teach our kids at a young age, just to experience life and be who you are and not try to be more than you actually are. That's a big thing. Part of that, you know, the pathological lying and all that. So that's a big, huge thing we need to get a grip on, especially with our kids when we notice that, especially nip it in the bud really quick. There's also the defiance of authority. It's a consistent aggressive pattern of breaking rules and showing contempt for the social norms or parental boundaries. There are kids are always pushing the boundaries, see what they could get away with. But at a young age, you know, as they get older, yeah, you're really starting to put in when the critical thinking kids. But a lot of times kids, when they're younger, if they want a bottle and all that, it's not defiance really of authority, but it's pushing those boundaries to see, you know, hey, is mom going to come and do this for me? So those types of things. So they start realizing a pattern, and we want to keep it as a healthy pattern and not a pattern where it's being more aggressive and contempt or anything like that. There's interpersonal red flags. It's manipulation using charm or deception to get what they want from peers or adults, just almost like we just talked about. But there's also the social isolation or power dynamics. Some may be like loners. You know, it's always as you get older and the serial killers, oh, that was such a quiet kid, or you don't even remember them from high school or anything like that. Or they were such a quiet person. Same with the neighbors say about them, oh, they were such a quiet person, that loner mentality and all that. You know, we want people to be social. When you're a loner like that, there's a lack of being social. And being social is important. I think, you know, when we get older, we want to be alone, let people leave us the heck alone. But as you're growing up, social interaction is very important. How we deal with people, how we just deal with life. And, you know, when we get into jobs, when we get on a sports team and how we work together and all that. So these are the things that you want to be cognizant of too. Many of the budding offenders actually attempt to dominate their peers also through intimidation and bullying rather than seeking genuine connection. So that's the other part, you know, the bullies, where they come from, what is going on in their lives to create that. And again, on the other aspect of it, what's going on in their lives to be loners. So those are the things we have to dig deep in. There's an impulsivity and the need for stimulation. You know, those are kids that are constantly bored. That is only relieved by high risk thrill seeking or aggressive behaviors. Yeah, you know, kids will do some crazy stuff and all that to seek attention, or just, again, like we talked about earlier, they just want to feel, they're bored. Do I feel anything? So it's just a need to have stimulation. They're lacking in that. Again, that's a big one. But the role of the environment, it's important to know that many serial offenders share a history of significant childhood trauma. I'll repeat that again, significant childhood trauma. There's a lot of us that have this. Again, loading the gun, shooting the gun, whatever that happens in our lives. A lot of this includes, you know, the severe physical or sexual abuse, early abandonment or unstable primary caregivers, and of course, head injuries, specifically in the frontal lobe, which governs impulse control. You know, that's the thing to notice. Your kids go out to play one day and they come back. And I remember Generation X, we'd fall off our bike, whack our head and get dizzy. And we're like, yeah, whatever, and go home. And the next few days, you know, things start changing for you. Sometimes you don't notice it yourself, but other people notice. So that's where that could come in with those head injuries that we don't know about. So it's always important to get everything checked out, especially at a young age where we're still developing our head and all that, and a little bit more of the injury that could be significant later on in life. So we have to be cognizant of that. Of course, we can't be running behind our kids all the time. They can't wear a helmet everywhere. You know, we have to let our kids, you know, experience but we want to keep them safe too. But you don't want to be that helicopter parent, because that could be just as bad with things too. There's practical parenting strategies. So we're talking through kind of what I was leading into. There's the emotional literacy that we talk about. It's giving kids the feelings vocabulary. They have to understand their feelings. Again, communicating. If they have pain, describe it, whether it be mental or physical or anything like that, spiritual down the road. And they don't have to act it out. We want to, encourage them to put words to how they're feeling, suggest words or anything like that, or work with them, read books to them or anything along that nature. I know a lot of people out there, there's a lot of children's books out there that help with those feelings, vocabulary, things to seek out through Amazon or where you get your books. There's restorative justice at home. This is the big one. Instead of just time out, everybody just gives a time out and they never tell them, you've been bad, go in time out, or go sit in the corner and stick a piece of gum on your nose, or any of those things. But we have to focus on how do we fix what is broken. So the making amends. So if they do screw up, there is a time to take a deep breath and relax. I do believe in that with the timeout, but you can't just say, hey, you're free to get out of timeout. You have to explain, what happened and them to figure out to make those amends. We got to work on that coping mechanisms and all that. And that's a big one. Perspective, we want to, perspective taking, what we perceive and all that, the games that we could play to help our children. Just a simply daily exercise to help kids wonder, how do you think that person felt when that happened? So we want our kids, especially building empathy, whether they see it from us or whether we try and teach them at a young age. We want them to use the words like we talked about, their feelings vocabulary. We want them to have that empathy for others. So we have to use those words for them to describe. That's a big one. And, this is the part of that where this is the thing that gets me. And a lot of people that have seen me on some of these podcasts talking about some of this stuff, the thing that gets my goat, and I know some people disagree about this, but I really think, especially with athletics for young children, of course, none of us want to see our kids cry. We don't want to see our kids hurt. But we do still need to have those emotions happen to be a healthy kid. Not everything's, farting out unicorn with sparkles and all that. So we got to realize there's a real life out there, and we want our kids to learn, especially at that very young learning age, because it is said that we learn a lot of majority of what we've taken to adulthood at that early age, kindergarten on and all that. Not everyone should get a trophy. All right. That's the big one. Just because they played a game and a participation trophy, things like that, it drives me nuts. And that's me personally. I don't know how you guys feel. Maybe you guys have questions at the end of the show, but we need to teach our kids to cope from winning and losing. We need to talk through it. Like we talked about, give them the words. How did you feel? Did you feel that there's something else you could do? Is there something that we could work on? So the next time around, we might win, but even if we lose, we have to be able to cope with it where it doesn't get out of control and turn into something unhealthy. But they have to learn that, because you get up later in life and all that, you are going to be at a job and they're not going to give everybody a trophy. You have to perform. And then when things go wrong, you have to be able to cope with it. There's a lot of cases because of this. I think like recent cases, I know there was a young man where he asked this girl to go to the prom and she said no. And I don't think he could cope with it. He didn't have those skills to do it. He ended up turning around and murdering her. But that's what I'm talking about. It's one of the cases. There are many, especially the kids are getting younger and younger, going into prison. And I think a lot of laws are changing where some of these kids are going to go to prison for life and never experience adulthood. And we need to nip that in the bud at a younger age and be more open and communicative, know what's going on. But again, it's a fine line. There's no book on how to be the perfect parent and, overparent, underparent. it's tough. Again, like the title of the show is, it takes a village. We all need to help. We all need to help the generation. We all need to do that. But there's also the big thing is when I talk about childhood trauma, this is where it comes in, because I talked about earlier that sometimes, we block things out. They may manifest into adulthood and we just don't realize, with some of the little traumas to the huge traumas, what goes on, how it affects us and how we deal with it. So, neglect is often invisible trauma, but it's effects that are profound. So a child's basic emotional or physical needs are consistently unmet. They may fail to develop a secure attachment style. Secure to anything. There's, that knowing that somebody's there for them. Neglect could come in different things. We have to be cognizant too. I know there's a lot of people, adults out there, parents that are working to keep a roof over their kids' heads. They get into some of these jobs where they can't get time off. That's unfortunate because, if you make a promise to your kid that you're going to be there for a play, that's sometimes considered neglect over time, missing a lot of those big events. It's tough. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of that happens with divorce and all that. I went through it myself. I was in Florida. I missed out on a lot of the things with my own children, with them coming up, and, thank God that they're healthy. And, there are things that they go through. All of us do have traumas. All of us have things that we need to talk about with our kids, even in adulthood. We all have those issues and all that. None of us are perfect. You could be a profiler and, forensic psychologist and still screw up like I do. We all make mistakes as parents. So I don't want you to feel like, oh, I screwed my child up and all that. But again, I do go back to a lot of it, do we take blame? We put blame on ourselves, and that's the hard part. But, we're all responsible with our own path. We all go through these things, what we pass on generation to generation. Unfortunately, we're not perfect human beings. We strive to be, but we strive to know that if we screwed up, that we try and make up for it, and try and have that communication, whether it be in childhood or adulthood, and try and work through those things. That's probably the most healthy thing that you could do. But in childhood, there's withdrawal, parentified behavior, taking care of the parent, or extreme self-reliance. That's a neglect there, where unfortunately some kids are forced at a young age to be a caregiver for their own parents. That could affect them, because when they get into adulthood, there's difficulties with intimacy. They avoid attachment style, or a deep-seated belief that they are unlovable, or that others are inherently unreliable. They take on so many responsibilities. They feel they have to do everything themselves, that nothing's good enough, because they got put in that position that they have to control everything and they have to be there for everybody. And it's hard to get intimate because, you have those issues. It's tough. And that's a big one. Emotional and verbal abuse, that's probably what you hear the most about when they show movies about kids, what they go through, the parents arguing and all that. Station, I just went to go see the Broadway play, The Outsiders. And that's a big thing there. The family there loses their parents. The older son there, Derry, is trying to raise his kids. So he runs into that issue. I know he's older at the time, but still, he's got to be the parent for them. But also the emotional verbal abuse that the character Johnny went into, and they show how his parents are yelling at each other in the shadows and all that. So it was a pretty powerful play. It's always been a powerful book, especially with traumas of childhood and, what we go through with bullies, and what, we don't understand about each other because there's no communication. You're that side, and there's that difference, and we never get to know each other. But of course, in that show, Cherry Valance and Soda, not Soda Pop, but the Pony Boy, they got to talk, and they had a lot in common. So they really aren't that different, and that's what we got to get to our kids, to understand each other and have those types of ways of coping and being able to understand each other. is a lot of times to avoid those things. But emotional and verbal abuse, the constant belittling that some parents do to their kids, scapegoating or gaslighting, usually by a caregiver, attacks the child's developing their sense of self at the time. And childhood people pleasing, they're trying to people please, fawning. They want perfectionism or extreme self-criticism. People is like, oh, I messed that up again, and they get angry at themselves. So that's a lot of that. So it's trying to satisfy the person that was verbally abusive, trying to please. So in adulthood, again, of course, it turns into a low self-esteem, imposter syndrome. They don't feel like they're good enough to succeed. The inability to set boundaries. We have a hard time with boundaries. We don't want to disappoint because we don't want to get that verbal, emotional abuse. So many of the survivors of this struggle with a harsh internal critic that echoes the voice of their abuser. So that's embedded into their mind that they can't please anybody. And that's tough. It echoes as life goes. And if we keep passing this from generation to generation, it gets worse sometimes. So we have to find that out for ourselves. If we went through it, we got to be the person that stops that. So the next few generations don't have to go through that. We could develop, our children or our family and our ancestors to come in a better light. There's physical and sexual abuse. This is the tough one. This is the one that gets me every time. This is where a lot of family stuff comes in, a lot of the neighborhood stuff. These are the traumas that violate a child's physical autonomy and safety. Those big ones, often leading to significant changes in the brain's stress response system, that HPA axis. Literally, people, listen to me straight. Anybody that's out there, I know a lot of this stems from kids that are sexually abused, end up growing up and being sexual abusers. A lot of serial killers, it's sexual violent crimes and those types of things. It has to start somewhere, because when these things happen to these young kids, when their brains are developing, when they are sexually molested, abused, whether they understand it or not, it changes our chemical makeup of the brain. You're basically, even though that child grows up to be an adult, when you sexually abuse or molest a child, you basically killed them. You killed what they could grow up to be. You put a death sentence on them in their mind, in their development. Again, I know the state of Florida just passed a law where if you sexually molest a child under a certain age, death penalty. And I firmly agree with that. You may disagree with me, death penalty, anything like that. But other than murdering somebody, sexual assault, abuse is the worst. You basically is the same thing. You kill somebody, you killed this child, or you killed somebody that you sexually assaulted, and you have no part being around me. And that's my opinion. I know the show down here, they're showing it. I'm just giving you opinion of how I feel. I know a lot of people out there feel the same. So what really happens is we recognize this. If somebody did something to a child, that's really we have to look at. Children start becoming very hyper vigilant. They disassociate, they tune out, they have aggressive outbursts where they didn't have them before. Those are the things to look at. And really what this stems into adulthood is that chronic fight or flight. You feel like you're constantly like, oh my God, you're always constantly checking things and like something's going to happen. And that's where that brain changes from back in childhood and how it manifests as we get older. Your PTSD or your complex PTSD, this may manifest as a difficulty trusting others. Of course, you don't know. You're like, hey, sexual dysfunction. People don't know how to have that intimacy or, that healthy sex life because it was taken away from them. It was totally destroyed. And it's hard for them to really have it healthy, with people with the right therapy. There's health that could come to that. but it's so tough. It's a hard mountain to climb. The people do have a tendency to shut down during conflict too. So somebody's like sexually abused speech and all that. That's a hard one and all that. That's one to contemplate. That's one that gets my goat. Yeah, don't bring that in front of me. I really had a hard time. I'm a professional. I did work in a prison for quite a few years. There was one specific dorm at one of the prison I worked at that all the people that were in that dorm, they were the child molesters. They're the ones that kept them separate from the other population to keep violence from happening and all that. So everybody deserves a right to serve their time, I guess. But yeah. And the thing that got me is when we're going to talk about abusing children, I'll tell you a personal story. So when I did work at that prison, I did work in that dorm a couple times, and there was an inmate that would clean the office. That was part of their job. All the inmates had jobs that they had to do. They couldn't stay stagnant and all that. So that was one of his jobs because of his age. That's really all that they could do for him. When I left the prison system in 2007, moved back up to Connecticut from Florida. At the time, I ended up over at Hartford Hospital, and a friend was getting surgery, and I was just out walking around, and they still had the boxes with the newspapers in it. Back when people still read newspapers. Everybody's all digital now, of course. I still like the feel of a newspaper. But what caught my attention was on the cover of the newspaper was a picture of this inmate. And for me, being back in Connecticut and knowing this guy cleaned my office in Florida, I was dumbfounded. I was like, why the hell is this guy's picture on this newspaper? So, of course, I bought the paper and I read. Just so you understand, when you're in law enforcement or you're of that authority, you tend not to get put in the prison where you committed the crime in that state. So this gentleman was overseeing children that were, just getting out of juvenile and all that. And he had to keep an eye on them. And unfortunately, he was molesting these kids. I think it got up to a count of about 100. And then he got arrested. The reason why his picture after all these years is on the front of the cover, because a lot of the kids that he molested grew up to molest other children, and their way to try and get out of what they did was to blame on him. And that's why that story came back up. So it was pretty intense just reading that and knowing that, hey, the Interstate Commerce Act, where people could go from one prison to another, and him going from all the way Connecticut down to Florida. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, that really shows you right there that people of authority, what they could do to children and what happens to them and how they carry what they may think that's normal to them, that's sex, and what they do the same thing. We got to be careful of that. Now, there's a household dysfunction, growing up in a home, substance abuse, domestic violence, of course, untreated mental illness could create an environment of chronic unpredictability. Of course, in childhood, we are a hyper awareness of others' moods. We want to act as the family hero, of course, dad beating up on mom, you want to come through, you feel like the lost child. So in adulthood, that brings out high levels of anxiety, a need for total control or subconscious magnetism towards chaotic relationships because stability feels unfamiliar or unsafe. Of course, in adulthood, you always date the wrong person. Why do I keep dating the same type of person all the time? It's, you need that help. You need to work through it, that trauma, whether you could do some EMDR, DBR, those types of things to help the brain and refocus because of those traumas that you had. And try and get through those things so get into a healthier relationship and not the same old one that becomes chaotic. So our long-term behavioral impacts, when these traumas occur during critical development windows, they often lead to specific personal adaptations. Of course, we talked about hypervigilance. An adult may be addicted to scanning environments for threats, making it difficult to relax or trust. That sounds familiar. But disassociation, a survival mechanism where the mind detaches from reality. In adulthood, this can look like spacing out, memory gaps, or emotional numbness. some disassociation. That's a really bad traumas. People develop going to that fantasy place and not knowing the brain just goes there because of how it rewired. Some people confuse that with multiple personality disorders. I just think it's disassociating. And when that trauma happened at that time, our safe place was this. Then another trauma happens, our safe place is that, and we act that out. And it's sometimes, you know, the debate between multiple personalities and just multiple traumas and how we dealt with them and where our minds went and developed is another way of looking at it. Our emotional dysregulation, difficulty managing intense emotions, what looks like anger issues in adult is often lingering defense mechanisms from child who was never taught how to self-soothe. Again, we want to teach our kids how to cope and how to soothe things and how to relax and deep breaths when they get angry or they're having a hard time communicating. We want to teach them those words. There's also this fawn response. What we hear about a lot is a personality shift toward extreme compliance and self-sacrifice to avoid conflict or abandonment. You know, we overdo things sometimes just, you know, to avoid feeling of abandonment or getting yelled at, those types of things. So our neurological foundations, trauma can physically alter the brain structure. We talked about this, somebody being sexually abused, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. We know something's wrong, can become overactive, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and impulse controls, we can't control those when the development there, may show decreased activity. This imbalance often explains why survivors react to non-threatening situations with intense emotional or physical survival responses. You know, just one little thing could set people off. They just can't handle it. So, but, you know, the other things we want to look at really quick, I know we're getting near the hour, but a lot of this is important. There's a lot to it, but this is for more of the teachers, the caregivers, what to look out for, especially in the school setting. You know, we're developing our psychological issues and how we get along with other kids, those stressors that might happen. So there's a chronic emotional dysregulation we talked about. Children experiencing trauma for instability at home often lose the ability to regulate their fight or flight response. The hypervigilance we talked about, child who is constantly scanning the room or the room while they're not paying attention in school because they feel like something's about to happen. They startle really easily. Somebody drops something and they get spooked. That PTSD, almost like veterans when they come back from war, just hearing gunshots go off, the yelling at a house, those types of things. The loud noises, or is too aware of the teacher's movements. Teacher makes a sudden movement, freaks him out too. There's a little sign of abuse. You know, a successful home environment where they must anticipate the danger that they're going through. Reactive aggression, overacting to minor slights, appear accidentally bumping into them, and intense physical or verbal rage. The total opposite part of that. The flat effect is a total lack of emotional response. This is the disassociation offer, indicates the child was checked out to survive emotional or physical pain elsewhere. Yeah, totally check out. It's just, yeah, you know, I have had enough of this, so I'm just going to check out. And that's another sign of things that are going wrong at the house that teachers need to look out for to get these kids help, especially because sometimes, unfortunately, adults aren't going to get them the help that they live with or the neglect there. And sometimes, again, the village has to take over. We have to do that. We have to be there for each other. We have to know when something's wrong. We got to step in. You know, you're killing that kid just as much as the abuse that's going on. So if you recognize it, just do something about it, whatever you got to do. You know, there's a lot of resources out there and to get to, especially one of the resources, of course, is a healing group or Druna. That's another big thing where we try and help parents work through these types of things with our life coaching. So, even interpersonal patterns, how a child interacts so the others can reveal a developing lack of empathy or distorted view of power. We're targeting bullying, moving beyond standard playground meanness. You know, sometimes that happens amongst kids. They disagree with each other, but it's a more calculated, repetitive victimization of those perceived as weaker. So we're trying to garner control because we have no control at home. That's why bullies become bullies, because they can't handle. So they try and look at something weaker because people at home are a lot stronger. So they're trying to find their way. Social isolation, my choice, not just shyness, but a total withdrawal from peers, often accompanied by a preoccupation with dark or violent themes and drawings or writing. You're a teacher, you're going by, kids are doodling. Sometimes you notice that kid at that age shouldn't be drawing something like that. So something's going on. Check them out to school psychologist. Hopefully the parents are aware, something could have happened with a relative, a neighbor, like we talked about the sexual abuse, what they start writing. Again, the animal cruelty, but also with other students is, the McDonald triad, again, harming animals is a major red flag, of course, in school age children. It's indicating a profound displacement of anger and a lack of empathy. Our boundary and control issues, children who feel powerless at home often attempt to exert extreme control in the classroom. Just talked about that. Rule testing, pathological defiance of authority figures, not out of mischief, but as a way to test the safety and limits of their environment. Inappropriate sexual knowledge, so that's another one to see if they're being sexually abused. Their behaviors or their language are not age appropriate, often signaling exposure to adult content, what they're seeing, or abuse outside of school. Educational and academic gaps, regressive behavior, child suddenly reverting to younger behaviors, baby talk, wetting themselves, extreme clinginess. Again, when kids go through some behavior, they want to go to safety. The safety they remember is a younger age. So they go back to that type of behavior at the younger age because they were safe at that point. So it's kind of the same thing. The perfect child mask, sometimes a red flag in a child who is too compliant. They are so terrified of making a mistake that they often become paralyzed by perfectionism, which can mask deep-seated anxiety and volatile home life. Our little exchanges here: unexplained bruising, poor hygiene, extreme lethargy. That physical is a sign of neglect or physical abuse. The other red flags that we see: cruelty to peers, animals, inability to form bonds, attachment disorder, lack of empathy. So these are things for our teachers, our caregivers, our neighbors, part of the village to see and get our children some help them develop and put them on a better trajectory as they get older. There's the morbid preoccupation in the art and writing, internalized trauma, violent ideation, disassociation, spacing out for long periods. That's severe emotional trauma. So that's total checkout. But, with serial killers, there is that development trajectory that we see and how they develop and things we have to look out for. They have that progression of being a predator or anything like that. That phase one as a predator or turning into that type of killer or anything like that we talk about as we're profiling. Phase one, that's the social isolation and rich, violent fantasies. Phase two is testing boundaries through petty theft, bullying, or minor vandalism as they're developing into that crime. Phase three, the escalation to animal torture and fire setting. And in phase four, the objectification of others, where people are viewed as tools or prey rather than individuals. So they have no feelings for others and all that. And that's like the trajectory as they build that childhood and that goes into adulthood. But, in closing here, I'm going to give you some closing thoughts. Again, the good enough parent. Again, nobody's perfect. You could over-parent, under-parent. So I want to reassure all the parents out there that perfection isn't required. Consistency and repair are. Those are the big things. Professional help, of course, knowing our resources, getting them help when we see these things. And don't be mad if somebody sees something we don't, because some parents think their child is perfect. Unfortunately, that's the over-parenting sometimes. When we see a child psychologist, we want to remove the stigma. We want to just make sure that, hey, this isn't going to affect their whole life. They need to get help, because if they don't get help, it's still going to affect their whole life. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think you're better off seeing a psychologist, because that's going to be better off in the long run. So the final mantra: a child whose feelings are felt is a child who can feel others. Again, let's teach our kids the right way. Let's be there for them and all that. So, why the serial killer hook always gets all the listeners in the door. I remember this episode, I kind of stealthily pulled it on you a little bit. It's just, I want to advocate for mental health awareness. Compassionate parenting is a big thing. It's crucial to distinguish between a child acting out due to a temporary crisis and a child displaying a consistent trajectory or that callous emotional traits, the CU traits. Remember, early intervention, such as the trauma-informed counseling, is the most effective way to distribute these patterns before they solidify into an adult personality disorder or the catalyst to become a serial killer, murderer, a life of crime, any of those things, horrible relationships, anything that it leads to. We just want our kids to be healthy. We just have to be aware, again, just be consistent and just be there for them and teach. And that's the best what we could do. So let's bring Sean back on, see if we have any questions. I know we're getting to the top of the hour. We could blow through these, and if not, maybe I can answer some next week when we come back on.
Well, I will say this for one thing. You've got a lot of people that come in tonight. It's made a lot of comments. Said hi. You had Stacia, Kenneth Drake, Christy Murray, Raven Wolf, Latrina, Christy Rico, Jeremy Cotter. All these guys came in and said hi. Some of them made some comments that you could check out a little later as well. I will say this. Every time I listen to you, Thomas, I learned something new, and a few things clicked in my mind as well. I mean, we come from Generation X, and we were made to strive and get better. And when you said something about they need to go back to participation, when they participate, maybe 1 through 3, like we used to do back in the day, and not give everybody trophies, because that made us bust our butt to strive to get better. It made us work harder. And I think that's somewhere where we got a conflict with the next generation now, is because we know how to get it done and they just want it now.
Yeah, it's earning it. It's doing the work. I talked about this in actually the paranormal field too. Too many people want fame right off the bat. They don't want to do the work.
Most definitely.
Again, even with what we're talking about tonight, but just anything in general, to get anywhere, you have to do the work. You have to have a goal, but you have to do the work to get to the goal. The goal just isn't going to happen.
Right.
It's not like winning the lottery or anything like that out of luck or osmosis. We have to do the work. We have to do the study. We have to get along with our peers, because our peers give us information that helps us reach our goal. So we have to work together instead of knocking each other down. But you can't just get through life while somebody does everything for you. You can't do it, even with childhood.
I know
when make decisions, but us as parents need to give them those tools to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I know when my kids were growing up, I tried to explain that to them, and mine pretty much understood. And I was in shock when they got into the sports and they just got all these participation things, because I said, you had to earn it. You had to bust your butt to get it. And my daughters understood that, and I'm grateful that they did. Also, another thing you brought up, you said one of the states brought back the death penalty for child molesters, under a certain age. I definitely agree with that 100%.
Yep, I do too. That's you talk about drawing the line. I'm not even going to justify drawing the line to that type of crime.
Exactly.
No, I know, like I talked about the inmate that, I realized that he molested all those kids up in Connecticut. That's why he was down in Florida being a probation officer, and realizing that, some people grow up because that was done to them and they do it. But the thing is there's 2 things I always talk about that happen in life. You could let it eat you alive, or you could overcome it. Get the help that you need. You went through something. Parents out there, you see something your kid goes through, get them the help they need. There's no stigma attached to it anymore. We got to get them that help. We got to teach them how to cope. We got to know what's going on to give our kids the best path. Again, we talk about neurodivergent and other kids that have different developmental things. There's still a path for them also. We have to know what's going on, and we have to know what's what, and distinguish, and not, look at stuff where we make the wrong choice or the wrong move or anything like that. Again, there's no manual on being the perfect parent. We just have to be there for our kids, keep them safe, and know and communicate when we know something's wrong, and get that help for them.
Most definitely. Thomas, keep doing the great work you do, man. Like I said, every time I listen to you, I always learn something new.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to see how your brain works.
Yeah, it's still working at 55. That's why I do this show. So hopefully these stay in the archives, and I won't forget some of the stuff. Need to write it down. Need to do some more books and stuff, and do some more writing. So get this stuff down, and hopefully hopefully this down the road, somebody that's watching tonight hears this, puts it into practice, and we could save one of our children's lives, or we could recognize something and save another child, get them on the right trajectory. That's the main focus. Again, it's talking about profiling serial killers and stuff like that. Again, I'm never going to glorify that, but people don't become serial killers just to become serial killers. Things happen. And these are the things I want to teach people what to look out for. Maybe there's a couple kids that we keep from getting that perfect storm happening where they become that type of criminal. So, and that's important with these types of shows.
Most definitely. And by the way, looking forward to having you on the show June 7th, and we'll get into some deep conversations about some of this again.
Yeah, we will. A lot of other stuff, hey, that true crime and paranormal all go together. That's one of those things. And I always love talking about either topic. It doesn't matter. Those are the things that I've really been part of my whole life. Especially this. I've even told Lee and all the people that run the network, this is my life's work. It's very important, and I want to put it out there and show my passion to people out there about the topic. And hopefully, if only like 5 people are watching, one of them, it could change their life or it could save their life.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
And that's what I'm thinking next time we're on. That's going to be on that note, to save your life. I think next week's episode, as all planning goes properly, next week's episode is how not to become a victim. Things to look out for, protection, those types of things to look out for when you're out and about, how to be around these crowded places or in parking lots and social situations. And we're going to talk about the psychology of that and how to protect yourself. And if you are a victim and you do get captured, types of stuff to leave behind so somebody could find you. So just being smart about it, and hopefully that people get that info. Again, they could avoid something. I know the last show that we did on the network, there was a woman that watched the show in Arkansas, and because of that, she avoided potentially being kidnapped in a parking lot. And we're happy about that, and we just want to keep passing that type of information around, because it just takes one person to change the trajectory of how their life is. So, yeah.
Most definitely. Like I said, you do amazing work, Thomas. Keep it up, and I enjoy watching your show as well.
Yeah, and I'll say hi to everybody after. I'll look at some of your questions, maybe at the beginning of next week's episode. If I didn't answer everything, I appreciate all you that watch. It's really important. It makes me feel good that you share my passion that I give to you. But again, I know we're run over, Sean, but like I said, at the end of all the episodes and anything you see me do online, I always say, hey, see you guys next week, and down the rabbit hole again.
Most definitely. Everybody have a great night, and see you next time.